He pulled an animal out of the swamp and realized it was a lion cub in the heart of the African wilderness. A man thought he was rescuing just another struggling creature trapped in the thick mud of a swamp. But as he pulled the tiny, trembling body free, his breath caught. The helpless animal wasn't what he expected. It was a lion cub, weak, soaked, and clinging to life. From that moment, his world would never be the same. What began as an act of kindness turned into a journey of survival, courage, and a bond no one could predict it. Before we dive into this powerful story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any of the inspiring tales we bring you. Stories of resilience, unexpected friendships, and the strength that connects us all. Stay with me until the end, because what happens between this man and the cub he saved will touch your heart in ways you never imagined. The morning sun had just begun to burn away the fog that clung to marshlands when Ethan Clark pressed deeper into the wilderness. He wasn't a ranger, not even a wildlife expert, but a volunteer field worker helping a local conservation team in southern Africa. His job usually involved simple tasks: delivering supplies, setting up camp, helping track animals through GPS signals. But that day, his path would cross with something far more unpredictable. The swamp stretched endlessly before him, a tangled mess of reeds, mud, and stagnant pools. He had been warned to avoid it. Dangerous footing, crocodiles hiding beneath the surface, snakes coiled in the reeds. Yet something had drawn him there, a faint sound, almost like a cry. At first, he thought it might be a bird, but the longer he listened, the more it pierced his chest. Fragile and desperate, nothing like the call of a heron or stork. It was the sound of something pleading for life. Ethan pushed forward, boots sinking ankle-deep into the sludge. The smell was heavy, humid, with the sharp bite of decay. He brushed mosquitoes from his neck, his ears tuned to the sound ahead. Then he saw movement, a shape thrashing weakly in the mud. At first, he thought it was a dog. Its small body was almost completely coated in thick black mud, only its eyes and part of its muzzle visible. The creature's chest heaved with shallow breaths, and each time it tried to lift its head, it slid back into the muck, weaker than before. "Oh, God!" Ethan whispered, wading closer. As he knelt and brushed the muck from its face, his heart stopped. This wasn't a dog. The rounded ears, the faint spots on its forehead, and the tiny but sharp claws told him the truth. It was a lion cub. Ethan froze for a second, stunned by the impossibility of it. Cubs that young rarely wandered far from their pride. For one to end up alone, trapped in a swamp, meant something terrible had happened. His thoughts raced. Had the pride been attacked? Had poachers killed the mother? Or had the cub simply wandered too far and gotten lost? The cub let out a pitiful whimper, snapping Ethan out of his thoughts. Its wide amber eyes blinked up at him, full of fear and exhaustion. There was no time to question why it was there. If he didn't act, the cub would die. "Hold on, little guy," Ethan said softly, though his own voice trembled. "I've got you." He stepped into the swamp, feeling the mud suck at his legs. The cub's body was wedged deep, the swamp clinging as it determined not to let go. Ethan reached down, his hand sliding under the cub's frail torso. The mud resisted, sucking tighter with every pull. The cub whimpered again, too weak to struggle. Ethan gritted his teeth, pulling harder. The suction was relentless, and for a moment he feared he might lose his balance and sink beside it. His boots slipped, mud creeping over the tops, but he leaned back with all his strength. With sudden slurp, the cub came free, its small body collapsing against his chest. Ethan stumbled backward, nearly falling, but managed to keep his footing. He cradled the cub in his arms, mud dripping down both of them. Its fur was matted, its breath shallow, but it was alive. "You're safe now," Ethan whispered, brushing muck from his eyes. "You're safe." The cub's head sagged against his arm, too weak to resist. Ethan's chest tightened. He had no idea how long it had been trapped, how much strength it had left, or even if it would survive. He carried it out of the swamp, each step heavy with mud. When he finally reached solid ground, he knelt, laying the cub gently on the grass. He pulled a canteen from his pack, unscrewed the cap, and poured a trickle of water into his palm. Carefully, he touched it to the cub's mouth. At first, nothing happened. Then, weakly, the cub's tongue flicked out, lapping at the water. Ethan felt a rush of hope. "That's it. Drink," he urged softly. "Don't give up on me." The cub drank greedily, then coughed, its body shaking with the effort. Ethan supported its head until it calmed. He couldn't help but marvel at it. The tiny paws, the delicate whiskers, the faint spots still visible on its coat, a sign of its youth. This was no more than a few months old. A fragile creature born to grow into a king of the savannah, yet now fighting just to breathe. As the cub's breaths grew steadier, Ethan glanced around nervously. Lions never roamed alone. If this cub belonged to a pride nearby, its mother might not be far, and if she found him holding her baby, her reaction would be anything but grateful. The bushes rustled in the distance, and Ethan's heart leapt. He held his breath, listening. The sound faded, only the chirping of insects filling the air. Still, the thought lingered. If the cub had been abandoned, why? And if the mother was gone, what would happen to it now? Ethan wiped mud from his arms, his mind racing. Leaving the cub was unthinkable. It wouldn't survive the night. But taking it meant stepping into dangerous territory, both literally and morally. Conservation rules were strict. Wild animals belonged to the wild. Interfering could disrupt nature's balance. Yet what balance was there in leaving this cub to die? The cub whimpered again, its eyes flicking open, meeting his. Ethan felt something shift deep inside him, an invisible thread pulling tight. In those amber eyes, he didn't see just an animal. He saw a plea, a question, a fragile spark that needed someone to believe in it. "All right," he murmured, stroking its mud-caked fur. "You win. I'm not leaving you." He wrapped the cub in his jacket, tucking it close against his chest. Its small body shivered against him, but slowly its breathing steadied. As Ethan rose, the swamp stretched behind him, silent once more. Ahead lay miles of wilderness, dangers unseen and questions unanswered. Why had this cub been left alone? What had happened to its family? And what would it mean for Ethan to step into the life of a creature destined for the wild? He tightened his hold on the fragile bundle, his jaw set. Whatever lay ahead, this was no longer just about survival. It was about courage, compassion, and the bond that had begun the moment he pulled the cub from the swamp. And as the sun climbed higher, Ethan walked into the unknown, unaware that this single act of kindness would change not only the cub's future, but his own. Ethan carried the cub for over a mile before his legs began to tremble under the weight. Though small, the little lion was not feather-light. Its body sagged against his chest, exhausted, limp in places that made Ethan's heart ache with worry. He paused beneath a thorn tree, lowering himself slowly to the ground. The cub blinked up at him, its amber eyes dulled by fatigue, its breath shallow. Ethan stroked its damp fur, brushing away dried mud, careful not to startle it. Each touch reminded him that this was not a puppy or a kitten. This was a lion, wild, dangerous by nature, even if its tiny frame seemed harmless now. "Guess I'll call you Chance," Ethan murmured, "because that's all we've got right now. A chance." The cub's ears twitched faintly, as though it understood. Ethan pulled his pack closer, rummaging through supplies. He had no formula, no tools for caring for an animal like this. All he had was a half-empty canteen, a protein bar, and determination. He poured water into his palm again, letting the cub lap weakly. The animal's rough tongue tickled against his skin, each swallow giving Ethan a small measure of relief. But relief soon gave way to worry. Lions required more than water. They needed nourishment, shelter, protection. And Ethan knew the rules. Interfering with a wild animal's life could bring trouble. Rangers warned about human contact, the risk of cubs becoming dependent and unable to survive in the wild. But leaving Chance? That wasn't an option. He glanced across the plain stretching around him. The swamp lay behind, but before him stretched the savannah, golden under the midday sun. Vultures circled lazily overhead, a grim reminder of how quickly weakness was devoured out here. Ethan tightened his grip on the cub. "We'll find help," he promised. By late afternoon, Ethan reached a ranger outpost, a weathered building with a tin roof and a radio antenna leaning slightly to one side. Relief surged through him as he approached, but it faltered when he saw the sign nailed above the door. Wildlife Protection Authority. No trespassing without permit. He hesitated. If he handed the cub over, would they care for it or put it down? He had heard conflicting stories. Some sanctuaries raised abandoned cubs, but others claimed resources were too limited. Ethan's jaw tightened. He couldn't risk walking in blindly. As he lingered near the outpost fence, the cub stirred in his arms, letting out a faint cry. The sound was soft, yet powerful. It reminded Ethan that hesitation could cost more than rules. A ranger stepped out of the building then, tall and broad-shouldered, his khaki uniform dusty from the field. His eyes narrowed as they fell on Ethan and the bundle in his arms. "What do you have there?" the ranger called. Ethan swallowed hard. It's a cub. I pulled him from the swamp." The ranger's expression darkened as he approached, his boots crunching on the gravel. "You shouldn't be carrying that. Cubs die for a reason. If the pride abandoned it, nature already made the decision." Ethan tightened his hold. "Nature didn't pull him from the swamp. I did. He's alive. He deserves a chance." The ranger stopped just in front of him, eyeing the cub. "And what will you do with him? You think you can raise a lion?" Ethan's voice was firm. "No, but I can keep him alive until someone who can takes over." The ranger studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Come inside. We'll see what we can do." Inside, the outpost was sparse but functional. Maps pinned to the walls, radio equipment buzzing faintly, shelves lined with supplies. The ranger gestured for Ethan to lay the cub on a wool blanket spread across a table. Chance whimpered softly as Ethan set him down, his tiny body trembling. The ranger fetched a small bowl, mixing a powdered formula with water. "We keep some supplies for rescues," he explained gruffly. "Not often for lions, though." He offered the bowl carefully, tipping it toward the cub's mouth. To Ethan's relief, Chance drank eagerly, lapping until the bowl was empty. For the first time since pulling him from the swamp, Ethan saw a spark of strength in the cub's eyes. The ranger nodded. "He's got fight in him. That's rare. Most don't last." Ethan stroked Chance's head gently. "He has to last." The ranger leaned back, folding his arms. "You know this isn't simple. If he lives, he'll need proper care, veterinarians, a sanctuary, maybe even hand-rearing. It costs money, resources, and not everyone agrees wild cubs should be saved at all." Ethan's jaw set. "Then I'll find a way, whatever it takes." The ranger raised an eyebrow. "You're serious about this?" "I didn't pull him out of the swamp just to let him die here," Ethan said quietly. The ranger studied him for a moment, then sighed. "Very well, you can help care for him. But understand this, if you fail, it'll be on both of us." Ethan nodded. "I won't fail." That night, Ethan lay on a cot in the outpost. Chance curled in a box beside him lined with blankets. The cub slept soundly, his tiny breaths rhythmic, his paws twitching in dreams. Ethan couldn't help but watch him. The fragile life he had nearly lost in mud and silence now steady against the night. But peace didn't last long. In the distance, a low roar echoed across the plains. Ethan froze, his heart thundering. It wasn't close, but it was unmistakable. The roar of a lion. The ranger stirred in his cot. "The pride," he muttered. "They might be searching." Ethan's chest tightened. "Then shouldn't we return him?" The ranger shook his head. "If they left him, they won't take him back. Cubs that fall behind rarely get a second chance." Ethan looked at Chance, sleeping peacefully. The idea of leaving him out there, alone again, was unbearable. He whispered under his breath, "Not a second chance. A first real one." Still, the question gnawed at him as he drifted into restless sleep. If nature had abandoned Chance, what gave Ethan the right to intervene? And what dangers would come if the pride discovered him keeping their cub? At dawn, Ethan awoke to find Chance awake, his amber eyes bright for the first time. The cub let out a small cry, stretching his legs clumsily, his paws oversized compared to his tiny body. Ethan smiled, reaching down to stroke him. "You're tougher than you look," he whispered. "Maybe tougher than me." The ranger entered then, carrying another bowl of formula. "He'll need feeding every few hours," he said. "It's not easy, He may not survive, but if you want to try, you'll need to commit fully. Ethan didn't hesitate. I'm committed. The ranger gave him a long look, then nodded. Very well. Then the cub is your responsibility. Ethan lifted Chance carefully, holding him against his chest. The cub nestled close, letting out a faint purr-like sound. In that moment, Ethan knew the truth. No matter the danger, no matter the doubt, he couldn't walk away. But as he stood by the window, gazing out across the endless plains, a shadow of worry crossed his mind. Somewhere out there, lions roamed, wild, fierce, protective. If they discovered what he had done, saving a cub they had abandoned, would they see it as compassion or as theft? The days that followed settled into a fragile rhythm. Ethan remained the ranger outpost, helping care for Chance around the clock. The cub's body was still weak, but each day brought small victories. He drank eagerly from the bowl, wobbled on his paws a little longer, and even managed short bursts of playful energy before collapsing in exhaustion. Ethan marveled at every step. The faint spots on Chance's golden coat shimmered in the sunlight, and his wide amber eyes tracked Ethan with growing recognition. At night, when the cub curled against his chest in the blanket-lined box, Ethan felt a warmth that erased a memory of the swamp's cold, sucking mud. But alongside the joy, tension simmered. The ranger, whose name Ethan learned was Samuel, reminded him constantly that Chance's survival was uncertain. "He's fragile," Samuel said one evening as they cleaned out the box. "Cubs this young, without a pride, usually don't make it. Don't let hope blind you to reality." Ethan nodded, but inside he rebelled. He had seen the spark in Chance's eyes, the will to live. He refused to believe the cub was doomed. Yet the wilderness was always waiting to test conviction. On the fourth day, a storm rolled across the savannah. Dark clouds blotted out the sun, and the air thickened with the smell of rain. By late afternoon, thunder cracked above the outpost, and sheets of water hammered the tin roof. Chance cowered in the box, ears flat, eyes wide. Ethan knelt beside him, murmuring softly, "It's just thunder, little guy. Nothing to fear." But the cub trembled, letting out a high-pitched cry that pierced Ethan's chest. He lifted him carefully, cradling him in his arms. The cub buried his face against Ethan's shirt, claws pricking lightly, seeking safety. Samuel watched from the doorway, shaking his head. "He's imprinting on you. You realize that, don't you?" Ethan looked down at Chance, who had relaxed slightly against his chest. Maybe he just needs someone to believe in him. Or maybe he's forgetting he's a lion, Samuel countered. That's the danger of this bond. He may not know how to survive if you get too close. Ethan didn't answer. Deep down, he knew Samuel wasn't wrong. But as lightning lit up the sky and the cub pressed closer, Ethan couldn't imagine holding back. The storm raged through the night, and by morning, the outpost radio antenna had been knocked down. Samuel cursed under his breath as he inspected the damage. "We'll need to fix this. Headquarters is expecting a status update. If they don't hear from us, they'll send someone." Ethan glanced at the cub, who was still curled in the blanket. "What happens if they come?" Samuel's expression hardened. "They might take him, and you may not like what they decide." Ethan's chest tightened. The thought of Chance being taken from him, after everything they had survived together, was unbearable. Samuel packed tools into a bag. "I'll handle the antenna. Stay here. Keep him safe." Ethan nodded, watching Samuel disappear into the rain-soaked grass. For the first time, he was alone with Chance. The morning passed quietly, until the cub stirred with unusual restlessness. He paced clumsily around the small room, letting out sharp cries. Ethan knelt, trying to calm him. "What is it? Are you hungry?" He offered water, then formula, but Chance turned away, whining louder. Ethan's heart sank. Something was wrong. Then he heard it, a sound outside, low, guttural, and terrifyingly close. The unmistakable growl of a lion. Ethan froze, his pulse racing. He crept to the window, peering through the rain. And there, only 100 yards away, stood a lioness. Her golden coat was slick with rain, her eyes fierce as they swept across the outpost. Chance cried louder, stumbling toward the door. Ethan's chest clenched. Could it be his mother? The lioness stepped closer, her powerful frame rippling with tension. She growled again, louder this time, ears pinned back. Ethan's mind raced. If this was Chance's mother, she might recognize him, take him back. But if not, if she saw Ethan as a thief who had stolen her cub, he and Chance were in grave danger. The cub clawed at the door, desperate to get out. Ethan grabbed him gently, holding him back. Not yet. I can't lose you now. The lioness roared, the sound shaking the walls. Ethan stumbled backward, clutching Chance tightly. The cub squirmed, crying in response, his small voice echoing hers. Ethan's heart pounded. Every instinct told him to stay inside, to protect the cub, but another voice whispered, what if this was his family? What if the only way to save him was to let him go? He stood frozen between the two choices as the lioness prowled closer, her muscles coiled with lethal power. The door burst open suddenly. Samuel rushed in, soaked from the rain. What's happening? Ethan pointed, his voice shaking. There's a lioness. Out there. I think she's here for him. Samuel glanced at the cub, then at the window. His jaw tightened. If that's his mother, she won't leave without him. But if she doesn't recognize him, he trailed off grimly. The cub squirmed in Ethan's arms, crying louder, almost frantic. Samuel reached for his rifle leaning against the wall. No. Ethan snapped. Don't you dare. Samuel frowned. I'm not saying I want to, but if she charges... Ethan shook his head fiercely. If she came for him, we have to give her a chance. The cub let out another desperate cry. The lioness answered, her roar tearing through the storm. Samuel cursed. You didn't get us killed. Ethan stepped toward the door, his arms tightening around Chance. His chest was on fire, every nerve screaming in fear. But he couldn't ignore the pull between the cub and the lioness. He opened the door slowly. Rain whipped across his face, the air electric with danger. The lioness froze, her amber eyes locking on him, then on the cub in his arms. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Ethan raised Chance, his voice trembling. Is he yours? The cub cried again, reaching out with tiny paws. The lioness let out a sound unlike the roars before, a deep, guttural moan, almost mournful. She stepped closer, slowly, her eyes softening as she focused on the cub. Ethan's breath caught. She knew him, but even as hope surged, fear lingered, because one wrong move could mean death, for him, for Chance, for them both. Rain poured from the sky in relentless sheets as Ethan stood at the open door of the ranger outpost, clutching the trembling lion cub in his arms. The lioness prowled just beyond the clearing, her amber eyes fixed on the bundle he held. Every instinct in Ethan's body screamed danger, yet something deeper whispered possibility. Chance whimpered, his tiny paws stretching toward her, his voice rising in a high-pitched cry that cut through the storm. The lioness answered with a low, mournful call, her muscles rippling beneath her soaked golden coat. It wasn't the roar of aggression Ethan had first heard. It was something softer, desperate, filled with longing. She knows him, Ethan murmured, his heart pounding. Samuel's voice came sharp and urgent from behind him. Don't be foolish. If she charges, we won't have time to react. Step back inside. Ethan shook his head, his grip tightening on the cub. Look at them. She's not attacking. She's calling for him. Samuel stood tense, his hand hovering near the rifle leaning against the wall. You can't trust wild instincts. A lioness doesn't care about your compassion. She sees her cub, maybe, but she also sees prey standing in her way. The cub squirmed harder, mewing frantically. Ethan's chest burned. He could feel the pull between mother and child, as if it were a rope binding them all. He stepped forward, out into the rain. Ethan! Samuel barked. Are you out of your mind? But Ethan ignored him, his boots sinking into wet earth as he moved closer to the lioness. The lioness froze, her tail flicking, her body coiled like a spring. Her amber eyes narrowed on Ethan, then softened when Chance cried again. Ethan raised the cub higher, his voice barely audible above the storm. He's yours, isn't he? You've been searching. The lioness let out a sound that sent chills through him, a rumbling moan that carried sorrow and relief all at once. She took a tentative step forward. Her ears pricked, her gaze locked on the cub. Samuel swore under his breath, raising the rifle halfway. "One wrong move, Clark, and you'll be torn apart." "Put it down," Ethan snapped without looking back. "If you fire, she'll kill us both." The rain drummed harder on the tin roof of the outpost. The lioness moved closer, each step deliberate. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. He could feel Chance trembling, torn between safety in his arms and the instinct to return to the mother who called for him. Ethan crouched slowly, setting the cub down on the wet grass. Chance hesitated, looking back at him with wide eyes as though unsure. Ethan whispered, his throat tight, "Go on. She's waiting." The cub stumbled forward, his tiny paws sinking into the mud. He let out a weak cry, and the lioness answered, her body lowering to meet him halfway. With a final burst of energy, Chance reached her, pressing his small body against her chest. The lioness bent down, licking the mud for his coat, nuzzling him with fierce tenderness. She let out another moan, this time softer, almost a purr. The cub nestled against her, his cries quieting, his body trembling less. Ethan's vision blurred with rain and tears. He had dreamed of saving the cub, but nothing compared to seeing him return to his mother's embrace. But the moment was fragile. The lioness lifted her head, her gaze locking on Ethan once more. He held his breath, unsure she would thank him in the only way lions knew how, by sparing him, or she would see him as a threat to be erased. Seconds stretched into eternity. The lioness's muscles rippled, her claws flexing in the mud. Samuel's voice came again, low and urgent. "She's deciding. Get back inside. Now!" Ethan shook his head faintly, whispering, "If she kills me, at least he's safe." The lioness stepped closer, Chance pressed against her side. Ethan braced, every nerve screaming. But instead of lunging, she stopped just a few yards away. She studied him with a depth that sent shivers through him, a silent acknowledgement that needed no words. Then, with a final rumble deep in her chest, she turned, nudging the cub ahead of her. Together, they padded toward the tall grass, their golden coats melting into the storm-soaked savanna. Ethan's knees gave out, and he sank into the mud, chest heaving. Relief, sorrow, awe, they all crashed into him at once. He had saved Chance, but in doing so, he had let him go. Back inside the outpost, Samuel slammed the door shut, his face pale. "You're insane. Do you realize what could have happened out there?" Ethan sat on the floor, rain dripping from his hair, his voice raw. She didn't attack. She wanted him back. That's all. Samuel paced, running a hand through his wet hair. Or maybe you just got lucky. Either way, you won't always be able to gamble with instinct. Out here, nature doesn't play by human rules. Ethan looked out the window, where the grass still swayed from the lioness's passing. His chest ached with emptiness. Sometimes instinct is all we have. That night, the outpost was quiet, but Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment in his mind. The cub's tiny cry, the mother's mournful moan, the way they reunited. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow. He had pulled Chance from the swamp, kept him alive, fed him, comforted him through storms. And now he was gone, back to the wild where Ethan couldn't follow. But beneath the ache, something else stirred. A truth he couldn't deny. The bond they had shared wasn't erased by the reunion. It lived inside him, in every heartbeat, in every memory of amber eyes meeting his with trust. As dawn crept across the horizon, painting the savannah gold once more, Ethan rose and stepped outside. The air was fresh, the storm washed clean. He stood in the clearing, staring toward the grass where he had last seen them disappear. "Be strong out there, little guy," he whispered. "You've got a chance now." Behind him, Samuel appeared, his voice gentler than before. Most people would have kept him, tried to raise him. You did the hardest thing, you let him go. Ethan turned, his eyes tired but steady. Because saving him wasn't about me. It was about him having the life he was meant to have. Samuel studied him, then gave a rare nod of respect. Not many understand that. Ethan looked back at the plains, his chest heavy but proud. He knew he would never forget the cub who had changed him. The cub who taught him that courage wasn't just about pulling life from the mud, but about letting it return to where it belonged. The savannah smelled of rain and iron when Ethan and Samuel followed the tracks into the fever trees. The prints were unmistakable. The broad pads of the lioness, and beside them the lighter marks of a cub. Ethan's chest tightened. Chance. They found her moments later. The lioness lay collapsed under a tree, a steel snare biting deep into her neck. Blood streaked her golden fur, her breasts ragged. Beside her paced Chance, crying and nudging her helplessly, his paws leaving anxious circles in the dirt. Ethan froze. The cub turned, amber eyes locking on him with recognition, and let out a small, desperate cry. Samuel's whisper was sharp. Careful. A trapped lion is more dangerous than a free one. But Ethan was already moving closer, every step deliberate. He saw not a beast, but a mother drowning in pain, and a cub begging for someone, anyone, to save her. Then came voices. Two men in faded camouflage stepped from the brush, one carrying a rifle, the other coiled wire. Poachers. Their eyes widened at the sight of the truck. The uniforms, the lioness alive. In a heartbeat, they turned and ran, crashing through the tall grass. Samuel grabbed his radio, relaying coordinates to nearby rangers, while Ethan dropped to his knees beside Chance. "It's okay," he whispered, though his own hand shook. "We're here." The cub pressed against him for a heartbeat, then bounded back to his mother, pawing helplessly at the wire. Ethan's throat burned. The thump of helicopter rotors soon cut through the air. Dust swirled as a veterinarian. Dr. Lindau leapt from the craft with a dart gun ready. One tranquilizer, then another, and the lioness sagged into heavy sleep. Samuel braced her head, while Lindau slipped a canvas hood over her eyes. "We got minutes," she barked. "Cut the wire." Samuel's bolt cutter strained against the steel. Ethan held Chance close, feeling the cub's frantic heartbeat against his palm. The first cut loosened the loop. The second snapped the twisted knot. The wire fell into dirt with a dull clang. Lindau flushed the wound, injected antibiotics. Her voice steady though sweat streaked her brow. "Come on," Ethan whispered, as if Shirwell might pull her back. "Don't let him lose you now." For a terrible moment, the lioness's chest barely moved. Then one breath, another, deeper. Her ribs lifted, steadier. Chance wriggled from Ethan's arms and pressed against her side, nuzzling her chin. Her breath warmed his fur. He curled into it, purring faintly. Safe again. Relief crashed through Ethan like a wave. When the sedative wore off, the lioness stirred, blinking beneath the hood until Samuel pulled it free. Her amber gaze flicked to Ethan. For a long, electric moment, predator and man locked eyes. She didn't lunge. She didn't roar. She simply looked, as if weighing something ancient, then turned away. With a nudge, she guided Chance toward the brush. At the tree line, the cub paused. He glanced back once, eyes meeting Ethan's. The boy who had pulled him from the swamp, fed him, held him through storms. Ethan raised a hand, palm open. "Go," he said softly. "You're home now." And then they were gone. The aftermath blurred. Rangers recovering snares, radio chatter about captured poachers, Lindau packing her kit. But Ethan carried one image like a brand. Chance's final look, a bridge between wild and human. That night at the outpost, Samuel broke the silence. "You know, most would have kept him, tried to tame him, but you gave him back. That's the hardest kind of courage." Ethan stared into the darkness beyond the window. He should have felt empty. Instead, he felt changed. Chance had taught him something no classroom or book ever could. That compassion was not possession. That real courage was knowing when to hold on and when to let go. In the weeks that followed, Ethan helped launch a new anti-snare patrol, using photos and stories of Chance's survival to gather support. Communities joined, volunteers spread across the plains, and wire traps grew fewer. Each success felt like an echo of the cub's cry, answered not by one man, but by many. And sometimes, at dusk, when the savannah shimmered gold, Ethan swore he heard a cub's voice calling faintly in the distance. Stronger now, woven into the pride, into the wild, exactly where he was meant to be. This is a story of Chance, the lion cub pulled from the swamp, saved from the edge of death, and returned to the wild where he belonged. It reminds us that courage is not only about fighting to save a life, but also about letting that life be free. So ask yourself, in your own life, where can you choose compassion over fear or strength over doubt? If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who loves inspiring stories. Because together, we can spread courage, hope, and second chances.